One of my most favorite ways of getting excited about science and engineering is talking to scientists and engineers who are really excited about what they do. Welcome to STEMdentity Journal Club. Every month, we're going to take an article and talk to its lead author to learn more about the amazing work that they've done. Let's meet today's guest. Fantastic. Well, I cannot believe that you are on my podcast. I need to take a moment and fangirl out for a sec because I'm talking today to Zoe Jewell, Dr. Zoe Jewell, who has many titles: adjunct associate professor at Duke University in the United States, associate academic at University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, and on top of that, in case you weren't busy, co-founder of the nonprofit WildTrack, along with your co-founder, Dr. Sky Alibi, who also holds the same roles. And you both are lead authors on this paper we're talking about today that is in Frontiers of Ecology and Evolution, published this year, 2026. The paper is a non-invasive footprint technique for accurate identification of cryptic small mammal species, a Sengi case study. But what I need to fangirl out about is that on your website for your WildTrack nonprofit company, you guys lay out your history and you just casually throw out as your first major milestone that you're just working in Zimbabwe, there we go, tracking black rhinos between 1992 and 2000. That's incredible. What a start to a career. But obviously you didn't just, pop out of the ground and start tracking black rhinos. So what's kind of the backstory to how you got to that first major milestone of your career?
Yeah, sure. I guess it is a kind of strange starting block. So I was at the veterinary school training to be a vet in Cambridge, and I just finished. And my partner Skylar, I was at University of London, teaching and working on small mammals. So rhinos was a bit of a kind of leap in angle for both of us, but we had connections in Africa, and we'd learned about the problems with monitoring black rhino. At that time, there was a big wave of poaching, one of the many big waves of poaching. And we thought, hey, it'd be really great to apply our, skills on the sort of veterinary side and the conservation side, and go out for a year's sabbatical. And they were very happy to have help. And our job really was just to monitor those collared rhino and check where they were going, make sure that the anti-poaching units were deployed to the same places that the rhinos were, and support the Department of National Parks in Zimbabwe in that effort. So yeah, it was, and it was really intended to be a short-term sabbatical, I guess, if you like. And I would then go back into veterinary medicine, and Sky would go back to his job at London University, and that would be that.
But no, that was not that. You stayed for quite longer. I guess I've been a lifelong subscriber of National Geographic, so I feel like, even as a child, I didn't necessarily read the stories, but I'd look at the pictures and kind of get the major key points. And this work feels like it's coming out of National Geographic, right? Did you interact with the press at that early time, or was it just a quieter endeavor?
Yeah, we didn't really. We saw it, I think, because we saw it as a part-time, as a short 1 year opportunity to help. We were not particularly. We thought we would just, get on and follow the rhino, and that would be that. But I think what was unexpected was that it turned into a 10-year research project, and a lot of very interesting things came out of that project, which of course then got press interest, and led us down a completely different path from the one we'd anticipated.
Yeah. And if I go back to your website, another major a milestone, I think around 2002 or so, was you published these three foundational papers. One demonstrated invasive monitoring methods are causing problems with rhino fertility, which is, a major finding in its own. Two, showing that radio collars were failing. And then three, describing how footprints can be used to monitor these populations. So WildTrack, the whole concept is using footprints to track different types of animals. So is this kind of the culmination? How did that spark of why not just use footprints come along?
Well, so when we started working with these rhino, the government policy was put a radio collar on every single animal in these intensive protection zones. So they had a plan. Our job was to go and, monitor those rhinos and see how the plan was working. But it became clear after several years of literally following those rhinos every day, walking around after them, collecting meticulous field data. Field work is slow and sometimes painful, especially when it's 40 centigrade and you're following something which is not always friendly, like the rhinos. But the data that was started coming out showed us quite early on that the collars were failing. And that wasn't so surprising in those days. It was fairly new technology. But what we didn't anticipate was that the regular immobilization of female rhinos in particular was leading to a reduction in fertility. And that most likely this was caused by the process of getting those collars on and off all the time, which involved chasing the rhinos over very rough terrain in high heat. A lot of stress was caused. And it seemed natural to me as a vet at that point that, it was if you did the same thing, say, to a domestic racehorse or any other sort of pregnant ungulate, you would expect, that would be very dangerous. Probably wouldn't keep the calf. So that wasn't so surprising. But I think what was surprising to us was that there was such kickback from the community on that finding. They did not want to hear it. There's a big industry invested in collaring. There still is, and I'll have to say, a lot of collaring has to be done, right? If you're translocating animals, you want to follow up. Collaring can be necessary and it can be valuable, but one has to be very cautious about how to engage with endangered species using invasive techniques. But anyway, it came out, we published it, and there was a lot of kickback. We had death threats, we had all sorts of aggravation, which made us think, oh, this is so distressing, really. I mean, you come up with something, you think, here's an opportunity to advance science, look at how we could be doing it better. And so we kind of segued. We said, okay, we'll segue. We've been working with these expert trackers in the field who came out every day with us with the radio receivers and the guns to protect against the lions. And they said, well, we don't really know why you're using these radio receivers or collars. All the information you need to identify these animals and follow them is on the ground. It's literally under your noses. So footprints. And we thought, oh, this is kind of, it's kind of, folklore, that it's not scientific. We had a typical scientific approach to it. But, after a certain length of time working with them, we began to see that when they could identify an animal from its footprint, and then they would take us to that animal, we would follow the trail, find the animal, and they were very often correct about which animal it was. So, and of course, they could identify all the species there. And we thought, gosh, if we could translate some of this for science, imagine what a powerful tool that would be. And that was really the point at which we had the second round of kickback, which was from scientists saying, this isn't science. You can't use footprints. It's a sort of, art. It's not a science. So really, I think that was the foundation of our. That was really the key point that made us say, hey, there's something here. This is more than a 1 year sabbatical. We've got to pursue this and see if we can translate some of this incredible traditional ecological knowledge for science, so that scientists can take advantage of it and help use it for conservation.
Yeah, so pulling back on a couple threads of that. So you mentioned the traditional ecological knowledge, which you've abbreviated tech in a couple, in your papers and your website, and you highlight that kind of throughout. And I really, so I'm a professor in engineering at this point in my career, and I'm trying to figure out, how do I remind people that there's other viewpoints out there, and that maybe you don't want to listen to that other viewpoint the first time it comes around, but over time it starts to click in a little bit. So I love that you've embodied that, and you've come up with a successful technology, nonprofit papers, methodologies that are really taking off, that are non-invasive, that is just based on, sheer observation of like people who've been in the area for, generations. So that's really impressive. The kickback, that's a little terrifying. I'm assuming when you say community, you're not talking about the local community, you're talking about the scientific community.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's, we all want to make a big impact, but sometimes we forget that impact means being visible, and sometimes being visible means being, in the line of fire, whether it's just rhetoric on the internet or hopefully never literally fire, but uh,
Right.
how did you handle that at the time? This was earlier in your career.
Right. It was very dispiriting, actually. We didn't expect it at all. We had the data, we had lots and lots of field data. We'd done the analytics very thoroughly. We'd been told by people working in the field with rhino, yes, they had observed them aborting after immobilization. So, it was like, okay, everybody kind of knows about this, but there was this huge resistance to making it public. And I think in some ways there was almost a feeling that, okay, putting the collar around them is protecting them from poachers. And if it means we lose a few along the way, that's okay, kind of thing. And we didn't really buy into that. I think we observed at least one population of rhino that had been completely dehorned and collared, and they were all taken out by poachers. So the whole poaching challenge is very, very difficult, and there are people working really hard on the front lines, to prevent poaching, and it is difficult. It's a very difficult problem, but I always feel that doing the best we can by the animals themselves should be the first priority in terms of not doing any harm when we are trying to monitor them. So that was our take, and really engaging local trackers in the process of anti-poaching is incredibly valuable. They have the knowledge, they understand the terrain, they're probably best qualified to protect the animals. So it was really, getting back to your question, it was dispiriting, but we felt we didn't really want to fight on the collaring front anymore. We didn't have the energy for that, I guess, but we put our energy into finding a better alternative, which was the footprints.
With the footprints, I feel like, reading in between the lines, you guys were very early pioneers of AI and image recognition, really. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, it's really interesting you should say that, because we started, what we were doing was effectively translating traditional ecological knowledge into an analytical approach. Now, the human brain is basically one gigantic natural intelligence organism, I guess. And so we were taking very basic elements of what the trackers could see and translating them using statistical morphometrics, right, into a footprint identification technology. But in a way, that is an early form of AI, right? It's using discriminant analysis. It's maybe one layer or two layers as opposed to a many-layered, modern machine learning approach. But it is developing models based on field data that you can then adjust to deliver the sort of classification you want, whether it's a species level or individual or sex or age or any of the others. But that's what it was. But that was, AI wasn't a thing then. It wasn't, nobody knew, nobody had talked about AI. It was really the trackers that had the AI. We were just kind of like the conduit for trying to translate that for science.
Yeah, and I think it's really, even to date, the paper that just came out this year, you're not pushing, you and Sky, the lead author on the paper, are not pushing this AI angle, right? It's a tool quietly in the background that's part of the whole ecosystem that you're working in. And again, kind of going back to my own experience with systems engineering, we're trying to encourage our students, it's a tool. It is not the solution, is not the answer. There's obviously, you probably run into this in your teaching roles as well. There's sort of that, you can tell the students who don't want to read the 10 papers that you assigned and they just want a quick AI summary and then have AI spit out, the writing. It's kind of like, that was not the right use of AI. You need to think. But there's these important, beautiful, not necessarily horribly computationally expensive, in other words, power hungry ways of using AI that's actually benefiting the planet. So I think it's a really beautiful integration of traditional knowledge, modern technology. Yes, there's a little bit of AI in there, but it's not, the banner line, which if you look at many papers coming out right now, it feels like it's the banner line, which okay, great, but there's a balance, and I really appreciate the balance that you guys strike. I do want to get into the paper, but maybe the last question I have before we dive into the paper itself is, you've worked all around the world. People, I will link certainly the WildTrack website in the show notes. You have a map of all the places you've worked in the world, which is incredible. I'm sure you have hours and hours and hours of stories, some good, some bad, some boring, but maybe, a couple of highlights along the way that pop into mind that you feel, you know, good or bad that you would like to share at this moment would be inspiring, I think, to listeners.
Yeah, it's there's so there's so much over such a long period of time. It's difficult to think of anything very specific. I think, the couple that I've shared already, I think this kind of field politics, are certainly key stories. We have stories relating to the AI as well. The kind of that's more to do with the sort of the technical side than the field side. But it's very nuanced, I think, working in the field. It's difficult to yeah, I don't know really. Um, I mean, there are lots of stories, like the classic stories, how he got chased by this, or how he narrowly escaped that. But I tend to avoid that because I think it's kind of sensationalizing field work that, in a way, shouldn't be. I always feel that if an animal is chasing you, or if you've had a narrow escape, you've done something wrong. And we actually lost many colleagues in the field over the years who were taken out by dangerous animals or in aircraft that hadn't been properly serviced, or there were quite a lot of sad stories. And I think one thing we can do is learn from that, right, and try and do better, which is how we talked about the initial, the whole thing with the rhino fertility. We're not trying to criticize people. We're saying this is the situation. How can we do better as a group? I think all of us as conservation biologists want the same thing. It's a matter of how we work together to achieve it. But stories, I mean, there is an interesting story around the Sengi paper actually, which I can tell you maybe of interest, which is that when we started working on this small mammal paper, and we have another one using just machine learning in the pipeline, but with this particular Sengi paper, look at these two indistinguishable species of Sengi, and our really was to show that using morphometrics we could distinguish them using just their footprints. So that was where we went in. It's cool. You've got these two little animals in your hand. You can't tell them apart. One lives on rocks, one lives on sand. Literally can't tell them apart. But their footprints are sufficiently different that you can use this technique to tell them apart. And what was interesting was that some of the data, well, the range maps for these two species were basically, okay, this species lives here on the sand, and this species lives here on the rocks. So when we went collecting data, we found that there were several places where actually these two species were almost in the same place, and it was going to, and their ranges actually covered each other's territory. So this immediately was like, oh, well, perhaps, it's not as clear cut as we thought. And when we plotted the maps, it was quite clear that using tracks, we were getting a completely different set of ranges from these animals than you get from even experts who've done traditional trapping, right? The experts would go out, they catch the animals, they pick them up, they identify them. That's okay. We found this animal here. This species always on the rocks, this species always on the sand. But using footprints, we actually were able to show this is not the case. And I think that there are many other species ranges where we could probably completely redefine how we see where these species are from tracks. So while that's not necessarily well, it is a story from the field, but it's something that's come out of close field observation using a different technique, get different results. So that was interesting.
Yeah, no, I actually quite appreciate that perspective because obviously, if you sit down and you watch a documentary, it's going to be all the splashy, exciting things. And it's worth remembering that, there's long periods of mild discomfort because the temperature's wrong or it's raining, or it's boring or you don't find the thing or you're studying something at night. So you have to be up at a weird time. And I'm a big encourager of try things and see if you like it. So if you are interested in field work, certainly look for opportunities maybe to volunteer for a summer or get paid for a summer internship. But I don't think a lot of people realize that most of us aren't built for field work. Like I'm not built for field work. I've done a very small amount. It was in a gorgeous place in Colorado and it's very chill and easy. It was still a little boring at times and kind of physically taxing. So I have this story of carrying 30 pounds of metal up a hill 3 miles, right? Um, so I think that's actually a really grounding perspective. So I appreciate you sharing and not just, diving into, because I'm sure you do have cool things, but there's also tragedies as you point out. And I think it's it's a discipline to be respected, not a discipline to just kind of yippee ki into and hope for the best. So
Yeah.
your stories were a perfect segue into the paper itself. A couple of just definitional questions right out the gate, right? We're again reminder the title because it's very descriptive is a non-invasive footprint technique for accurate identification of cryptic small mammal species, a Sengi case study. What are cryptic small mammals and what's a Sengi? For those of us who don't know.
Right. Well, small mammal, the definition of what constitutes a small mammal is a bit variable. Some people say, oh, it's anything less than a sort of, a badger, and some people say it's something less than 5 pounds, or, so it's very variable. But I think when we use the term small mammals, we're talking about primarily sort of mouse rat size, something probably less than 5 pounds. Um, Cryptic refers to the fact that you can't tell these two species apart when you see them, right? You could do it through DNA. You can probably do it with other parts of the body if you dissect them, look at the skull details or something like that. But of course, being non-invasive, we wanted to find a way to distinguish them without having to kill them or cut them up or take samples.
And the Sengis themselves, I see that they're also called elephant shrews or jumping shrews if people happen to know that name, but maybe a quick description of them.
So the Sengis are they're one of my favorite animals. They're the coolest little, I don't know if you've seen pictures of them. They've got these
They're so cute.
prehensile noses that kind of, wrap around things. Well, not wrap around, but they're very, very mobile, their noses. And they jump. And they used to be called elephant shrews. They're actually not shrews, which is why they got renamed into a different group of their own, Sengi. But they do something really interesting, and that came up as part of our work, which was when they're alarmed, they have this drumming that they do with their back legs. They've got these big back legs, like kangaroo rats almost. And when they're alarmed, they drum on the substrate like that, and you can feel it if you've got them in a trap or sitting on a box where you're collecting footprints. You can feel the vibration. And that also shows up on the tracks that we collect where the vibration is happening. So they're really interesting animals. No, I don't think anybody really understands a lot about exactly what these communications mean other than an alarm signal. But they're super cool animals, and they're great indicators of environmental health as well for their respective environments.
Yeah, I was going to touch on the putting this paper into context. Something I had no idea, but it was in the introduction of the paper is that I think the number was 30% of mammals in the southern Africa or maybe Africa total are small mammals, right? We think about the elephants and the
Right.
gazelles, whatever, but that these are truly large parts of the population indicator species. The work as I'm reading along, right? I'm trying to imagine myself in your shoes, and it sounds really chill for the animals, right? Compared to some sort of you describe some of the more traditional trapping methods, but this is more of a there's a box, there's some tasty treats inside. The Sengi enters, has some yummies, puts down a few footprints, and then goes along that merry way. Is that an accurate description? Was it a little more complex than that? Were you actually out there doing the field work yourself?
Yeah, we were out there and we have a great team in South Africa that we're working with as well. And so, yeah, we went out, we took several months to develop a really nice box that they could walk over the sticky paper on. And our colleagues in South Africa had already designed some ethically friendly traps that didn't get too hot in the summer or too cold in the winter. And we were putting cotton wool and food and everything in to keep them comfortable from when they were caught to when we ran them over the tracks. And yeah, it all worked beautifully. This is just like the first phase of the project to collect these reference tracks. And the second phase will be completely non-invasive, where we don't need to catch at all. We'll simply put tunnels out in the wild, and we'll have these animals run over through the tunnels, because that's what they do in nature. They like running along little grass tunnels on the ground. So they'll run through the tunnel, leave the footprints, and we won't even need to catch them. But we'll be able to identify the footprints from the baseline data that we caught during this reference period. So that's the plan. To me, the development of the non-invasive phase is kind of like the proof of the pudding, right? We've shown using machine learning now as well as statistics that we can identify these species from their tracks, but now the next phase is to say, okay, we can do it without catching them at all. And if you can catch, if you if you can monitor a species without having to catch it or disturb it in any way, the quality of the data you're getting back is going to be better.
Mm.
I published a paper on that in 2013, and I think it's something that's often neglected in the kind of the discussions around non-invasive monitoring is we're not only doing it from to improve the ethics of how we handle these or how we interact with these animals, we're doing it to improve the data, the quality of the data that we collect.
Right. It's sort of like the physics conundrum of is it a particle or a wave? Depends on how
Right.
you're observing it. You want the animals to act how they act, not act because they're freaked out because someone else is sitting over there. And not everyone has the
Right.
ability to be like a Jane Goodall who just stays with the community until they ignore her, right? Like, we don't have that luxury of time.
Right. Right. I'd never thought of the analogy with physics, but that's kind of interesting.
Feel free to use it. This is maybe this is a complete mystery, or maybe it's really obvious, but if these little fungi are cryptic, right? There's two species you're studying. You can't tell them apart when you're looking at them. Why are their footprints different? Is it kind of like human fingerprints?
I think that the statistical approach we're using and the machine learning now picks up very, very subtle differences.
Mm.
It is interesting. We've found this, they're looking at large species which leave their footprints on, natural substrate sand, that you can look at, two species are very different. Let's say a lion footprint and a rhino footprint, and most people can say, oh yeah, I can see those are different. But if you're looking at maybe a small lion and a large leopard, that's a little harder. And then you start looking at footprints from individual leopards, and you say, no, I can't tell, right? But the technology can. So it's very subtle, and it's we're currently looking at how the machine learning models can be explained, explainable AI, in terms of exactly what it is that they're classifying on. And it may well be that it's something quite different from what we're looking at as humans with our human brains, or what the morphometrics is pulling out. And they could all be equally valid and perhaps be put together for an even stronger model. But it's really fascinating looking at that. Certainly nothing obvious when you look at those Sengi footprints. You can't say, oh yeah, I can tell this is this one, this is the other one.
Makes sense. And then with the AI tools, have you basically thrown the photos of the animals themselves through to see if that performs just as well, if it performs less well? Because I think plenty of people might just be like, well, why don't you just have a bunch of wildlife cameras out taking photos all the time?
Well, that's a very good question, and a lot of people are doing that. A lot of people do have wildlife cameras out. They get lots of pictures of wildlife, things that haven't been seen before, new sightings. You can't get the same degree of detail with a camera, an image of an animal. For example, it's very unusual that you can tell, for example, the sex or the age.
Hmm.
It may be difficult to tell the individual if there's no special difference in color. For example, individual rhinos quite difficult to tell apart from camera traps. The other thing is that in order to get a good camera image of an animal, the animal has to be at a fairly straight orientation to the camera as it's passing by, and you have to have a camera there in place, whereas footprints are like all over the landscape, right? And there are orders of magnitude more footprints than there are animals themselves. So we have like a whole tapestry of data available out there, and they're refreshed every 48 hours by the wind or the rain. So it's like another layer of data comes on top. So just the sheer volume and the complexity of track data is so valuable if we can interpret it right. Many times more in volume and in quality than camera traps. I'm not saying camera traps don't have their place, they do, and they've done some amazing stuff. Looking at finding new species in areas where they weren't thought to exist before. But there are also issues with animals avoiding the traps, avoiding the cameras, and there are even issues with human communities, not liking cameras in areas where they're working in the fields and things like this. So every technique has its, pluses and minuses.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant perspective that it's just this rich tapestry of data. And also, yes, cameras are not perfect, right? It has to be a good angle. I don't know if this is still the case, but I did hear a few years back that every time, some sort of authenticator pops up a picture of like, pick all the bicycles or pick all the traffic lights or whatever, it's actually us having to train the AI because the AI couldn't quite determine, or they want another reference set of like what has the bicycle or, street
Right,
light.
right,
So I think that's a good reminder that yes, AI can do a lot of things, but it can't do that much with a blurry photo of, something scuttering by. But a footprint, as long
right.
as you get presumably, it sounded like for the paper you were looking at the front two paws because the back paws sometimes have the thrumming, which sort of threw things off. But
Right, right,
you have a good set of front paws, like
right.
you're good to go.
There's always this balance really with training the model because we've done a lot of work on this. I think if you train the model on not very good data, you don't get very good outputs. But eventually, you want the model to be able to incorporate a lot of real world data, not
Yeah.
just perfect tracks. So there's this kind of iterative process where you start with good quality data and then you gradually feed in more like real world data. And hopefully understand how it's classifying as you go along to get a reliable output.
Yeah. So, I've hit on a couple points in the paper, but I want to make sure I don't miss anything that you think is really key, really exciting. Any other findings you want to highlight from this particular paper? You talked a little bit about future work that I'm very excited to read about, hopefully in the next coming years. But what else?
Well, I talked a little bit about the future work, developing putting tunnels out for these animals to run through. And one of the things we're going to do is actually kind of try and automate the data collection from the tunnel. So once the animal's left, we'll have a camera built into the tunnel and probably some AI that will allow us to collect the images and automatically transmit them back to researchers at the base, replace the paper, this kind of stuff to make it quick and easy to do the monitoring. I think one of the challenges with monitoring small mammals, and you're right, they exist in every ecosystem on Earth, right? And they're a very high proportion of the number of mammal species. But one of the big challenges is it's very labor intensive. And if you're not terribly excited about being out in a muddy field at like 10 Fahrenheit, you know, bending down and seeing if traps have got animals in them, and again and again and again for weeks at a time, then not enough research gets done, right? Because it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's not exciting. So the more we can kind of automate the collection of data without disturbing animals, the better our vision will be of, what's really happening in these environments. And a lot of these small mammals that we work with are real indicator species. We know already that species one pops up, after fire, for example, or species two is prevalent when there's been flooding, or species three is there, when the ecosystem is at a kind of climax vegetation. So knowing which species are out there quickly and easily gives us a real snapshot on ecosystem integrity and health, which is a huge application.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also saw, in your next steps for the paper, the last section of your paper, you want to do even more community engagement, both with the local scientific communities and their traditional ecological knowledge. Is that maybe pivoting a little bit towards Wild Track? Is that really what Wild Track is trying to do, the more community piece?
Very much so. I mean, I think that's where we started working with trackers. The trackers were the source of inspiration for the technology that we've built. And we've learned to appreciate how important their voices are in conservation and how undervalued and underutilized those skills are. So we have an app that we use to collect data, and we always try to encourage people with tracking skills to help us collect data. They're the ones who are best at it. But we're also engaging with them to help us monitor the animals themselves, to annotate the data, to label the data, to review the data, and to help make decisions about where we take the conservation output. So building that bridge from traditional ecological knowledge to science is one of our key objectives because we can see how powerful it could be for better understanding of where endangered species are and which ones need our help. And that's really data. We have a lot of data on endangered species, but it tends to be centered very much around where research centers are. If you could get, the app into the hands of people who are not near research centers, you would have a ton of valuable data from other parts of the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with my phone, right? There's many exciting things on it that I want to spend too much time on, and I at least look at my Merlin bird of the day every day and contemplate, would I even possibly see this bird in Fort Collins, Colorado, with my extremely limited bird tracking skills? Very poor. I can recognize about 15 birds probably at this point in my time, maybe 20.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
No. But I think it's a really, use the tools at hand, right? Going back to the AI conversation, right? You're using the tools at hand to really accelerate things. Most
Right.
people have some sort of phone. They like to play with it. They like to have apps. Like, why not load up something that's going to be satisfying? Merlin, iNaturalist, Wild Track, etc. So I'm hoping to someday have my Wild Track app and do something useful for the company. Maybe a few more other things about Wild Track, some other major goals, and also, how do you balance? You've got these different faculty researcher positions at Duke, Australia, and you're running Wild Track. Like that sounds like a few 3 or 4 full-time jobs right there.
Right. It's a lot. I mean, I think pretty much everybody who runs a non-profit conservation organization will say the same thing, right? We're all split in a million different directions. But we just keep plugging on. I think one of the most important things is having a good network of collaborators, whether they be people collecting data on the ground or academic colleagues or recreational hikers that, like to go out and see tracks on the ground. We have a great team of machine learning and technical people. I think we've just been very lucky in that respect to have good connections. And one of our major corporate connections is a company called statistical software, which we built our first morphometrics models on and continue using to this day. And having that support from these different groups is key to success, right? Nobody can do anything on their own, and that's it's I always think conservation is about all of us. Wildlife conservation really is about everybody on the planet. Whether you decide, okay, I'm not going to eat steak today, I'm going to have, a salad or something, or whether you're out there collecting footprints, or whether you're getting involved with a local group, or whether you're doing technology, it all contributes to that output, right? That's I think what we're really trying to build in Wild Track based on the tech that we have.
Another thing I find incredibly impressive about you and Sky is that I have a theme on the podcast that comes up over and over again around communication, how important it is, and being able to not only talk to each other in our own little scientific discipline, clearly, that's challenge number one that some people never quite overcome. And then not everyone is built to talk to broader audiences, the public, and that's okay. We just need enough people, right, who are willing to do that work. So, you've both done a lot. You have you're in an Emmy Award winning documentary, you're in a Terra X documentary. You've done all this work. So I'd love to hear any tips you have for the listeners, how you kind of built up the confidence and the skills, right? You've got great answers, when to end. I'm a bit of a trailer. I don't know if that's an American thing, but I was like, well, are we really done with this thought? And I'm like, I'm learning from you right now. I was like, okay, when you're done with a thought, you just stop talking. It's okay to do that.
I don't know that I'm very good at that actually, and I think I think whatever you're trying to communicate in science, you have to kind of imagine yourself in the footprints of, or not footprints, the shoes maybe. I'm fixated on footprints. You have to imagine yourself in the shoes of the person who's asking the questions or who you're talking to. Um, And I don't think I'm very good at that. I get so excited about what I'm talking about. I go down a rabbit hole and they're left thinking, what? But I think if you can step back and just try and deliver the big picture and
Mm.
then let questions come and gradually explain things, I think it makes it easier for people. It's almost like the Montessori school approach, right? At school, we're always taught this is how this works, this is how this works. And you're left thinking, but what does it do? Or why should I know that? Right? Whereas you start at the top with the big picture and you try and communicate just that big picture, what we're trying to do, and then you let questions come about how you're going to do it. I think that's what I've learned something about over the years, although I think I'm still not very good at it.
I mean, I don't have any background in what you do other than the fact that I vaguely understand AI image recognition. And you've been extremely clear. So I think you're better than you give yourself credit for. Um, I think that's a perfect, start big. Even people who know more or less what you're talking about, they don't know exactly what you know, and getting kind of on this common ground is really key for people. And then you can start to narrow down. I've certainly seen the exercises of they're like start at the 10,000 foot, now go to the 5,000 foot, now to the 200 foot,
Right, right.
toggle back. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly,
Yeah, so
exactly.
I think that's a great tip. So maybe, we'll wrap up the interview since I know you've got very busy life running 3 full-time jobs and plus and all of your travel. But just to wrap this up, to go back to that big picture, what's next for Wild Track, for your research?
Well, quite a few things on the horizon, as always. We have several new projects coming up. We're continuing the small mammal project in South Africa, specifically to roll it out with no capture. We've got two Department of Defense projects, interestingly, on looking at building bridges between traditional ecological knowledge and AI, which are of interest to us specifically as a conservation organization because that's exactly what we're doing. And they're obviously of interest to the DoD for other reasons. But it's an unusual and a productive partnership. We've got projects with all our field partners around the world on different species, which are constantly ongoing. We're looking at education projects, trying to reach out to schools and universities to engage more with the technology that we have. Ultimately, we're moving towards this kind of creating a global network of data collectors and a kind of seamless pipeline of data analysis that supports it, right? So at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is have anybody in the field pick up an image and be able to get an inference on it, a real-time inference. So you take a picture of this, what's this footprint? And back comes the answer, it's a rhino, or maybe it's a male rhino, or maybe it's Rupert the rhino. And to be able to have all this mapped, for me, that's the icing on the cake. So we're in the process of developing a map for our website where people can go on and see where their observation is and see where other people's observations are. A little bit like iNaturalist, which is a fantastic resource, but using just tracks and the various benefits that the tracks have. So that it's, I've got 100 things that I'd like to do tomorrow if we had the funding. And that's, we all find our way there one way or another. It's like the whole career path thing unfolding in the over a day's work. You take various different paths and see where they go. But that's our big picture.
I mean, that's plenty to keep you very busy, and I'm so excited to see all the things coming out. I misled one more quick question, which is how can people get involved with Wild Track?
Well, there are lots of different ways. So on our website, there's a special section for would you like to volunteer? We'd love to have you volunteer. We've got lots of volunteer machine learning people, technical people. We would love to hear from anybody who's got special skills in communication or educational materials development. I always say I hate to turn away a volunteer because people say, "Oh, well, I'm not a wildlife biologist. What could I do?" And I can find something for them to do, right? And people who are dedicated, going to be really great volunteers are fantastic. So yes, lots of ways. If you're not sure if you want to do anything at all, just download the app and next time you go tracking and see a footprint, please send it to us. The app is fairly self-explanatory. There's a little tutorial. Find your footprint, take a picture, add a few bits of data in with it, and you're on the wild track map then.
Okay, I honestly missed, even though I trawled through the website, I missed that there's an app, so I'm gonna find it, make sure to keep that clearly in the notes. You're gonna get random things of, is it a moose or an elk? Never tell the difference. I can't tell the difference between the poop either. It's very frustrating. I never remember which one's like kind of round and which one's more
Well,
oblong.
moose and elk is a decent challenge. We have a lot of tracks coming in of large dogs and people thinking they might be a tiger or something like that. So should I keep my dog locked inside? And then we'll say, no, those are the footprints of your dog outside.
I mean, every bit of information counts, so that's good.
It's all good. It's all good. And we have some fantastic stories emerging from the database, which one day will make a nice communication. But yeah, it's fascinating. It's what keeps us chugging along in the morning.
Yeah. And Wild Track also has merch, so go grab your t-shirt or your mug, and maybe you'll find another wild tracker in the wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Friendships could be waiting for you, a t-shirt away.
Yeah, thanks, Anna.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for your time, Dr. Zoe Julie. This was so fun. And again, you have an incredible career, and I'm very, very grateful that you spent a little bit of time with us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was fun talking with you.
That was such an enjoyable conversation with Dr. Zoe Jewell. I think getting to hear the arc of her career, the ups, the downs, the maybe, to me at least, surprising pushback from the community, but that she and her partner were able to persevere. They have their own company now. They've done so many interesting roles. I think you can take so much away from this episode, and hopefully you do. Maybe my suggested learn and move your feet. In other words, we talked about a lot of things. What's something you could take away from this episode that you can try to implement right now is to double click on that traditional ecological knowledge or tech that we talked about a little bit within the episode, and think about this in your own context. Are there additional perspectives you could bring into your own research? Are there other people you could talk to? Maybe this is not a today thing or tomorrow thing, but even to put this in your mind and let that just percolate and sit around, stew in the background, and you don't know how it's going to pop out, right? Maybe your current research project, it's not appropriate on, but there's going to be a research project down the road that all of a sudden you realize that you can incorporate more views to strengthen what you do rather than just having your own limited, narrow perspective on things. As always, this podcast is not affiliated with my research and teaching roles at Colorado State University, but it's a part of my belief that we can all have jobs that we love in our STEM field. We live in a share-based, algorithm-based world, so anything, if this episode was useful and you share it with a friend, if you click subscribe, if you leave a review, all of these things are really appreciated and help other people find this podcast. You can hang out with me on Instagram at STEMdentity. Music is by XS Sass, also on Instagram, links in the show notes. And if you make it to the end of the episode, I always do a song of the week. And this song of the week is Ride On by C.S. Armstrong, for anyone out there who's watching the television show or has watched the television show, Residential Alien. Super funny show to me. I quite like it. This is the first song that comes on, and I was like, what is that song? This is such a banger. So Ride On by C.S. Armstrong. I hope you enjoyed this week's Journal Club, and we will hang out, as always, next week.